Once upon a time, in a land carpeted with emerald valleys and sapphire rivers, stood the grand kingdom of Etheria. Towering castles pierced the clouds, their spires glinting under a sun that seemed to shine less brightly these days. The castle walls, once echoing with laughter and music, now stood silent and cold, for within those walls resided Queen Seraphina, known throughout the land as the Iron Queen. Her heart, once filled with the warmth of compassion, had turned as cold and hard as the iron scepter she wielded with an unyielding grip. Seraphina, with her crown of shimmering diamonds and a gaze that could freeze the warmest heart, ruled Etheria with an iron fist. She saw kindness as weakness, compassion as folly. The queen, cloaked in gowns of the finest silk yet blind to the suffering around her, demanded absolute obedience and offered nothing but fear in return. The kingdom of Etheria, once vibrant and prosperous, began to wither under the icy breath of her reign. Fear, like a venomous serpent, slithered through the once bustling marketplace. Merchants, their faces etched with worry, whispered of dwindling harvests and empty granaries. Farmers, their backs bent under the weight of impossible taxes, spoke in hushed tones of their plight. But their voices, muffled by fear and despair, failed to reach the queen's secluded chambers. Queen Seraphina, lost in her world of opulent solitude, remained oblivious to the growing discontent. She sat on her throne, cold and distant, surrounded by courtiers who dared not speak of the kingdom's plight. Their silence, born out of fear, only solidified the queen's belief in her own righteousness. She saw her subjects not as people but as pawns in her game of power, their needs and desires insignificant in the grand scheme of her reign. But the whispers of discontent, like tiny seeds scattered by the wind, found their way into the most unexpected of places. One crisp morning, a shadow fell upon the queen's ornate chambers. An old woman, bent with age but with eyes that sparkled with wisdom, stood before the queen. This was Elara, a seer known for her truthful tongue and fearless heart. She had walked for days, her old bones aching, her heart heavy with the kingdom's sorrow, to deliver a message to the queen. "Your Majesty," Elara's voice resonated through the silent chamber. "Your heart is encased in ice, colder than the harshest winter. You have closed your eyes and ears to the suffering of your people." Queen Seraphina's face hardened. "How dare you speak to your queen with such disrespect?" she boomed, her voice echoing off the cold stone walls. "I rule with wisdom and strength." Elara, unfazed by the queen's fury, continued. "True strength, your Majesty, lies not in power but in compassion. Open your heart to your people's pain, for a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand." The queen, enraged by the seer's audacity, dismissed her with a flick of her wrist. That night, as the moon cast an ethereal glow upon Etheria, sleep eluded Queen Seraphina. The seer's words, sharp as shards of ice, pierced through the queen's carefully constructed walls of indifference. Doubt, like a persistent weed, began to sprout in the barren garden of her heart. For the first time, the weight of her isolation, the suffocating silence of her gilded cage, pressed down on her. Driven by a force she couldn't quite comprehend, Queen Seraphina decided to do something she had never done before. She shed her queenly robes, replacing them with a simple cloak. The shimmering crown, a symbol of her power, was left behind. She stepped out of her chambers, not through the grand doors reserved for royalty, but through a hidden passage that led to the heart of the city. The city, usually bustling with life, was eerily quiet under the cloak of night. As Queen Seraphina walked through the narrow, cobbled streets, a different kind of chill ran through her veins. It wasn't the cold indifference of her palace, but the raw, biting cold of hunger and despair. The sights and sounds of her kingdom, hidden behind the veil of her self-imposed isolation, assaulted her senses. She saw children huddled together for warmth, their tiny faces gaunt with hunger. She heard the coughs of the sick, their bodies racked with illness, echoing from behind closed doors. She witnessed families, once vibrant with hope, now huddled together in despair, their faces etched with the pain of her rule. Each sight, each sound, chipped away at the icy armor around her heart, revealing the woman she once was. The queen stood before a bakery, its windows dark, the smell of stale bread a painful reminder of what her people lacked. She saw her reflection in the grimy glass, but the image staring back at her was not the powerful queen she thought she knew. It was a stranger, her face haggard, her eyes reflecting the suffering she had inflicted upon her kingdom. For the first time in years, Queen Seraphina wept. But these were not tears of self-pity. They were tears of remorse, of shame, of a heart finally awakening to the consequences of its own coldness. The weight of her crown, once a symbol of pride, now felt unbearably heavy. Her journey through the city had stripped away her illusions, revealing the harsh truth. The kingdom of Etheria was dying and she, the queen, was responsible. As dawn approached, painting the sky with hues of hope, Queen Seraphina found herself in the poorest quarter of the city. She came across a young woman, her face etched with worry, trying to comfort a crying baby. The woman, her eyes filled with despair, cradled the child close, whispering softly, "I'm sorry, little one. I have nothing left to give you." Something within Queen Seraphina, a long-dormant ember of compassion, flickered to life. She reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small pouch of coins, her last remaining possession from her night of anonymity. She placed the pouch gently in the woman's hand, her own hand trembling. "Please," Queen Seraphina whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "take this, for your child." The woman, startled, looked up at Queen Seraphina. For a moment fear flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Gratitude. Hope. "Thank you," the woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, Queen Seraphina felt a shift within her. The icy grip around her heart loosened. The single act of kindness, offered without expectation of reward, had cracked the shell of her isolation. In that moment, Queen Seraphina understood. True power didn't reside in fear and control. It resided in love, compassion, and the courage to connect with her people, not as their ruler, but as a fellow human being.